Welcome to Crisis of Meaning Making. My name is Scott McLeod, University of Colorado, Denver. My office is about half a mile down the road. You can walk here in about 15 minutes or so. How many of you this is first time in Denver or first time in Colorado? Nobody? Awesome, good. Enjoy all the joys that the city and the state have to offer. As I said, we're going to be in groups of 2 or 3 together. This is an interactive presentation, so you'll have opportunities to speak with each other. And so we're going to do that right away. I'm going to give you that QR code again at the end, but all of my slides are available to you. So stick around, you'll get that later. So we're a small group, but just figure out who you want to talk with, who you don't want to talk with, all the important things. And let's get to know each other here real quick. So at your table, tell each other who you are, where you're from, and one boring fact about yourself. And I've given you a couple prompts in case you have trouble thinking of one. So we'll give you just a minute to do that, and then we'll roll. All right, we're back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, I thought you were about to say you're my biggest heckler. So the theme of our time this morning is around meaning making, and we're going to look at that through several lenses. I'm glad you have the book. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. And we're going to talk, our first lens is going to really be around engagement, or more accurately, disengagement of our students in school. So I'm going to give you a little more time at your table to just talk, and maybe since you have a larger table, split into a couple groups, maybe just a partner, 2 or 3, and share a time that you remember from school when your learning was deeply meaningful. And more importantly, what made it so? Like, what was happening? Why did that resonate with you? Have that chat and kind of split up the time in your small group, okay? See you in a couple minutes. All right, we're back in 4, 3, 2, 1. Nice. So we actually have a lot of research about human motivation and engagement, particularly as it pertains to learning. Here's probably an incomplete list of factors that drive student learning and engagement. And you may have referenced some of these in the discussion that you just had. So for example, we know that this idea of competence, right, is a driver for student engagement as students, ask themselves, am I getting better? Am I gaining efficacy? This idea around autonomy. Do I have some ownership in this process? Can I make it mine? Identity, right? Do I see myself as a fit within this discipline? Relatedness, this idea of belonging and connection. Do I see myself as a fit, not just within the discipline, but within these relationships, these networks? Am I gaining a sense of belonging, and so on, right? This idea around purpose. Am I, or are we together, part of something bigger than just myself and the content? And then finally, this idea of joy. Like, am I experiencing joy in this learning experience? Is this just a miserable slog? And so on. As you think about the conversations you just had, you probably referenced several of these in your discussion with your partner. Unfortunately, we have a lot of data that also show us that students right now are really struggling to find meaning in the learning tasks that we're putting in front of them. There's this really famous Gallup poll that happened pre-pandemic, right, that told us that even by 5th grade, we were already losing 1 out of 4 kids who said their learning wasn't interesting. And by the time you hit high school, you're lucky if 1 out of 3 students said, yes, my learning is engaging. Gallup had some great follow-up questions, right? Like, am I learning things that are interesting? Am I having fun? Am I getting to do what I do best? And over again, the numbers were just no, no, no. Now, the terrible part about those data is that was pre-pandemic, right? And we have data post-pandemic that are just as terrible, right? So we get stats like 70% of teens say most of their classmates are bored. Only 1 in 5 says that other students even want to be in the building. When you ask them about their own perceptions, 2 out of 3 say school is boring. A third say school is a waste of time. Like, this is the numbers are pretty grim, right? And the reverse of all of this is true, right? If students are not answering these questions, if they're asking themselves questions like, do I feel efficacious? Do I see myself as a fit? Am I experiencing joy, right? Then all of that turns into all of those markers that we know and are seeing every day with our young people, right? And I think one of the things that I'm really interested in is not just the extremes of these sort of like checkout behaviors, right? But the kids who are compliant but disinterested, right? And these are the kids that we're not paying enough attention to. And so, do you go by Elizabeth? Betsy. Oh, great. My wife is an Elizabeth who also goes by Betsy, so that's fun. So Betsy actually has this book sitting on her table in front of her, right? We have this wonderful book from Jenny and Rebecca around the disengaged teen. It has a lot of great data for us. And I think they've given us some useful labels to think about our young people, right? So the first label would be that of the resistors, right? These are the people, the students who are behaviorally, cognitively, and emotionally disengaged. Like they're just out altogether, right? And we see that as they struggle with feelings of inadequacy, they feel invisible, they ignore their homework, they play sick, they skip class, they act out. This is about 16% of our high school population, so about 1 out of every 6 kids. Right now, we might label a resistor. The ones who are disinterested but compliant are what Jenny and Rebecca call passengers. These are the kids who are just cruising through school, right? They're just along for the ride. They're not super invested. They're behaviorally engaged. They're not causing problems usually, but they are cognitively and emotionally disengaged. They're coasting along. They're doing the bare minimum. They believe that their classes are pointless. They need a lot of help connecting what they're being asked to do to things that they're interested in or that they're good at. This is about 50% of the high school population. So notice that already we've hit 2/3 of our secondary students, and we haven't even gotten to anything that feels like a good category yet, right? Third category is what we might call the achievers. These are the students who are behaviorally and cognitively engaged, but they're emotionally disengaged. They show up, they do the work, they get good grades, but their self-worth often gets tied to that high performance. They get stressed if they get a B. They worry about, if I get a 3.85, I'm not going to get into Yale, those kids, right? Their disengagement is often invisible. It's fueling a fear of failure. It's putting them at risk for a lot of mental health challenges. This is about 1/3 of our kids, about 30% or so, right? And then the final category that they mentioned in the book, which is this lovely category that Tom and I have been leaning into for a long time, is this category of explorers. These are the kids who are engaged in all dynamics, behaviorally, cognitively, and emotionally. They're driven by curiosity, not just external expectations. They are investigating things that they care about. They're persisting. They are goal-oriented. They have stuff that they're excited about, and they're doing. Unfortunately, in high school, this is about 4% of kids. That's pretty rough. For those of us who live in the world of instructional leadership, we know that this is not magic. This is design work. How do we design the school experience to address that issue, right? Because we know and we see over and over again that students will hang with us for the have-to stuff if they also know they're going to experience some get-to stuff. And unfortunately for most kids, there's just not enough get-to stuff. Right? They're looking at the things that we're putting on the table each day in front of them and saying, here, learn this, do that, right? And they're saying, I don't see these things present. So an interesting question for you, which I'm about to turn you loose on, is as you think about the schools that you're involved with, the schools that you're engaged in, the schools that you work in, how often are you explicitly and intentionally designing with these in mind? In other words, how often are you intentionally designing for meaning making? Are students getting enough get-tos? What evidence do you have to back up your claims? Have a good chat in your small group. All right, we're back in 3, 2, 1. I just want to say one final thing before we shift gears here, which is that I'm a huge fan of the work of Richard Elmore, who recently passed away at Harvard. And if you're not familiar with Elmore's work at all, one of the things he talks about is that we spend a lot of time talking about structures, but our changes in structures never get at the instructional core of what happens between kids and teachers on a day-to-day basis, right? So we can think of all kinds of things that are happening at higher levels that never ever touch the day-to-day classroom dynamic. And until we're willing to reach into the core and change that, anything else we do structurally is going to have minimal impact on kids and outcomes and so on. And so just want to leave that thought with you. If you're not familiar with Elmore's work, I encourage you to dive in a little bit. For our second lens this morning, I really want to talk about this idea of purpose. And this is an especially important lens for me because I visit a lot of schools. Not as many schools as Tom. Nobody visits as many schools as Tom. But I visit a lot of schools, and I'm just so tired of walking down the halls and seeing kids in this zombified state. They're just sitting there, they're staring, they're disengaged, their heads are down, they're slumped, they're slouched, they're leaning away rather than leaning in, they're quiet, they're passive, right? This sort of like zombification of education in a place that should be full of learning and joy. And that's particularly true as we go up the grades. So I said that this is a design issue, right? So one of the things that I do when I work with schools is that my colleague Julie and I, we created an instructional redesign protocol called the 4 Shifts protocol. It's free, and again, you can get all this with my slides. And what we're doing is we're trying to put design questions in front of teachers or teacher teams, and you can do this in higher ed too, not just K-12, right? Where we start to say, if we know that student agency and ownership is an important aspect of engagement, how can we start designing or redesigning around that, right? So section C of the protocol, as you see, has 9 different ways we could potentially give kids some agency. And then we can look at an existing lesson or unit or learning activity and say things like, so who's the primary driver of the talk time? Is it me, the teacher? What if I want students to be doing more of that discussion? How do I redesign this activity to decenter myself and have students talk more, right? How do we do a pivot from the answer of teacher to the answer of students, right? And to do that design work together, right? Maybe that learning goal is pinned. We all have to learn the Pythagorean theorem. Are there lots of different ways to learn the Pythagorean theorem? Absolutely. So maybe we can do some choice options or pathways in that learning activity bullet, the second one down. Are there lots of ways to show what we know and can do with the Pythagorean theorem? Sure. Maybe we can open up some options around the assessment of learning bullet and so on, right? So this is the basic idea, is that we're just trying to get some design questions in front of teachers. We're having great success with this protocol because it's very non-threatening and it's very sort of like an easy on-ramp. We're not asking teachers to blow up their classrooms for the next month with full gold standard project-based learning, right? What we're doing is we're saying, take that thing you're doing next Tuesday, tweak it a little bit, and see if you can give kids a few opportunities to own this a little more. And as you build your capacity and comfort level, you're also building their capacity and comfort level to take greater ownership down the road, right? One of the biggest failures we've had in sort of like school transformation is we're asking teachers to make the giant leap from relatively traditional instruction to gold standard PBL, and that's much too big a leap for most folks. Similarly, here's section A, and you can see that as we're talking about elevating the cognitive complexity beyond recall and regurgitation, that we're asking questions like, so yes, we want kids to know stuff, but are we also focusing on big important themes and concepts, not just trivia and minutia? Right? Can we really pinpoint where kids are engaged in deep critical thinking and analysis rather than quick, shallow thinking and analysis, right? Do they have a chance to design, to create? Is there opportunities for metacognition, right? These are the kinds of questions that we can design around. So I'm actually going to spend most of the rest of our morning time together talking about the third section of the protocol, which is section B. And I want to talk about this concept of inside the house versus outside the house. Now, those of us who are in Colorado, we would all love to have this house, right? And this is a lovely house in the woods, and I'm sure that there are really cool things happening inside it, right? And we do a lot of playing inside the house at school, right? And that can be fun, right? Like we do lots of fun activities inside school that kids like and educators like and so on. But we simply have to acknowledge that there are things we can do outside that just can't do inside the house, right? And so as cool as this house is, it's way cooler outside than it is inside, right? And the reason I bring this up is because everybody at this conference cares about students growing and developing new skills and becoming self-actualized humans and so on, right? And I like that too, right? And one of the greatest things about high school band, if you're a parent of an instrument player, is that you get to experience high school band first by experiencing middle school band, right? And in order to get to that wonderful 12th grade senior concert in band, you have to sit through the 7th grade concert in middle school band in order to get there, right? And so Joel Almeida and Sarah Fine have talked about this in terms of playing the whole game at a junior level, right? So when you're learning to play basketball, for instance, right, like we don't make you master all the dribbling skills and passing skills and shooting skills for years. And then finally, after you get good at all of that, then and only then do you get to play a game. What you do is you learn a few skills, you go out and you apply them. Now you learn from that experience, that game, and you come back and you practice some more, and you go back, and it's this dance back and forth between skill development and application. We are very poor at this in schools, right? We are set ourselves up to learn all the things ahead of time, apply them later. Now, we have some examples in school where we do better at this. The arts, other electives, extracurriculars are great examples of the power of playing outside of the house, right? Here's this wonderful art exhibit put on by high school seniors in Guangzhou, China. The students in your school who are busting their butts to put on the school musical in the next 2 months, right? That sort of public-facing event and all the crying and skill development and growth that comes with that. Things like Model UN or debate, robotics team competitions, all your CTE pathways where you're learning skills inside and then applying them outside, right? All of that is this combination of isolated skill development combined with applied, right, work outside the house. And what it does is it really translates into the difference between we're apathetic in science class, and then we're doing the exact same science in engineering class, and we're super enthused about it. And I am absolutely baffled that our schools cannot learn from the engineering class that's 50 feet down the hallway about how to make this science classroom more engaging. We literally have evidence 2 doors down about how to make this science topic interesting and get kids enthused about it, and we completely ignore it over here. That's wild to me. So section B of the protocol asks all kinds of good questions around real-world authentic work and playing outside of the house. And at best, what we see in most high schools is that schools are sometimes decent at playing in the blue box, right? They can ask kids to put on an authentic societal role. They might do some elements of practices and processes and tools and technologies like professionals use. They might be using some authentic disciplinary strategies. And then it stops and it gets handed into the teacher. And the difference between inside the house and outside the house is the green box, which is now we're taking students' work and we're getting it out of the building, out of the classroom, all the way into the community, right? And that could be local community, global community, online community, whatever. But now all of a sudden we're making real world products, we're making real world performances, there's an authentic audience, they're making a contribution that might help somebody, right? And this takes lots of different forms. So, local Colorado example, we had some students up in Longmont. They created an aquatics robotics program, and they're doing both surface level robots, like the yellow one that you see here, and underwater robots, like the one you see in white. What they're doing is they're working with scientists to preserve the local frog population in Lake Titicaca in Peru. Right? And so they're literally shipping these robots down to Peru. They're conversing with the scientists in their native Spanish because of all the Spanish-speaking students we have here in Colorado. In addition to the STEM work around the robotics, they're also engaged in helping the local community in Peru understand why the frogs are important and why they should engage in conservation efforts, and that includes a Spanish language comic book and so on, right? You can go to King Middle School in Maine, and students there in a combined English language arts environmental science project, right, have gotten permission from the powers that be in the city to rewild the city park and to return part of it back to its more native features before humans screwed it up so that they can bring back the birds that are dying out in the Portland, Maine area. And they have all these posts around the park that you can scan, and there's little videos from the kids, middle schoolers, explaining what's happening in that area, right? You can go to Iowa Big and Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and they're turning, defunct local zoos into active urban farms. They're creating submersible drones that clean up plastic waste in the ocean. They're, designing tricycle rentals for senior citizens. They're creating food pantries to feed the food insecure in their community, right? This is all great applied work. And one of my favorite examples is if you ever get to go to the Drew Academy in Atlanta, Georgia. It's this amazing STEM high school, and students do all the things that you would expect in a great STEM high school, right? Robotics, coding, web design, etc. And they didn't want to tell me about any of that. What they wanted to tell me about was that they had a neighbor down the street who was a disabled military veteran who could no longer mow his lawn. And so they had used their skills in class to design from scratch a remote-controlled robotic lawnmower so that their neighbor could do this. This is the contribution bullet of Section B of the protocol at its heart. It's this idea that can we take our skills that we're learning in school and do something that helps somebody in the community? And when you talk to kids about that kind of work, their elevation of meaning making and purpose is off the charts. And kids just don't get enough of that. So I'm just going to encourage everybody again to keep finding ways to play outside of the house if you want kids to find meaning making in what they do, particularly as they go up the grades, right? Some of that can happen inside the house. We can do PBL and Genius Hour and electives and extracurriculars and stuff like that inside the house. But at some point, you have to cross the line. You have to open the door. You have to walk out. And you have to lean into not just CTE pathways, but apprenticeships and internships and capstones and other experiential learning experiences. So back in your small group, are your students getting enough opportunities to play outside of the house? What might more of that do for them? Have a good chat. All right, we're back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. One last quick lens. You know, the panel joked that they didn't talk about AI at all. And I just want to drop a couple thoughts here near the end of our session about the impacts that AI is having on all this work. And I want us to really think hard about the conversations that we have about artificial intelligence, because a lot of the things that we're seeing with students is really AI as a symptom of something else, not as the cause itself, right? And so we see lots of students turning to AI because they find the learning work meaningless. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to go to AI and dispose of it as quickly as they can so they can toss it away and then do something that they're more passionate about, right? And I think, you know, that is not an AI problem, that is a learning problem. If this was my yard, I have multiple ways to attack this problem. One of the ways is with these. I also have this as an option, I have this as an option, I have this as an option, right? For those of us who are adults who have had plenty of opportunities to build up the muscle power and the wisdom and the experience, we might be more than willing to jump to the riding mower as a solution, right? The challenge is that we're putting riding mowers in the hands of kids who haven't yet developed those fundamental knowledge and skills and experience and wisdom, right? And then we act as if they know what to do with the riding mower through an adult lens of mind rather than a child or adolescent lens of mind, right? And we did this before, right? When we think about math, of course, there's lots of ways to do calculations. We have this as an option, we have this as an option, we have this as an option, and so on, right? But we have come to agreement over time that as adults, we may not calculate square roots and do long division by hand anymore, right? Do you do square roots by hand? No? You doing long division by hand? So, okay, bad question. Right, like in your personal life, right? Like as adults, we say we're willing to engage in some cognitive surrender to this device and let this thing do the calculations for us. But in school, we have said it is important for you to learn how to do that first without the device before you do it with the device, right? In other words, we're not going to hand a kindergartner a calculator. We're going to help kindergartners and first and second graders learn how to do basic calculations, right? And we want them to hold on to that conceptually and understand how that works. And then at some point, as they age up, we say, okay, now you've gotten this well enough that we're going to hand you the calculator and you can do this with the machine rather than by hand, right? But foundational first, then the machine, right? And I think there's so much concern right now about students causing their own cognitive surrender or cognitive offloading, right? They're making choices that we all bemoan as adults. Oh, you shouldn't do that because you're not going to develop your thinking skills or whatever, right? And I'm actually just as interested in this idea of we as educators also being the cause of student cognitive surrender. We're rolling out AI tools left and right. We're putting them in the hands of teachers and kids, right? And so take a look. These are just some of the possible ways that an educator might allow students to use AI in the classroom. Well, your writing should be your own, but maybe you can use AI to help you figure out what some potential arguments are, right? I can't be there at home when you're doing their math homework, so use the AI machine to help you see where you went wrong. You know what? You had a great small group discussion. Now use the AI to pull it all together into a mind map or an image. We had this outside guest speaker use AI to help you draft that thank you letter real quick so we can move on in class. We're having a group discussion. There's only two of you. Put AI over here as a neutral third voice, as a discussion partner, and so on. And I just keep coming back to this question of, if we care about student cognitive surrender, how many of those things, and many more, are we willing to outsource to the machine? Right? And as I look at that list, I'm not sure, as somebody who is the director of a university center for leadership and technology, I'm not sure that there's a lot of those that we want to outsource to the machine. And so as we're making our design choices around AI, think hard about, is this something that ultimately we want the machine to own instead of the kid? And when we let the kid use AI to accomplish that, what are they not learning how to do themselves? Did we give them the calculator too early? Are we engaged in a writing mower model of learning and teaching? Okay, we'll do wrap up here, and I'll just hang out and answer questions. Just, as you can tell, I'm on a mission to kind of help make school less boring and more relevant for kids. I'm tired of all the zombies that I see when I walk down the halls and visit classrooms. This is tough stuff. If you're struggling with it, everybody else is too, right? Keep hacking at it. Remember that we know what the elements of highly motivating learning experiences are. The question is, are we intentionally designing around those? Keep trying to move kids along the continuum towards explorer and away from resistor, right? Oh, wait a minute, I got to get through all my numbers again. Oh, and remember also the power of going outside, right? We can find a lot of purpose and meaning making that way. And ultimately, whatever tech choices we make are going to follow our learning model. So pay attention to those as well. Okay, that's it. Enjoy the rest of the conference. After the summer, we'll get back at it in the fall, and we'll see what we can do with kids. There's that QR code I promised you. Thanks for hanging out with me this morning. You had lots of other choices. Be well.